Robinson with us. She is the Executive Director of OASIS Domestic Violence Shelter. I'm going to let her jump in and tell us a little bit about what the shelter is for those who don't know.
All right. So OASIS has been around for almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years in May. It is a domestic violence advocacy program. There are 15 shelter programs across the state. There's one in each area district. And then we have our state coalition in Frankfort, which is called Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So 15 member programs across the state in each district. We are a 65-bed facility for our shelter. And then we have 4 non-residential offices. So we have an office in Davis County, one in Ohio County, one in Union County, and one in Henderson County. But we do serve all 7 counties within GRAD. So what does that look like? Of course, everybody knows us for the shelter. It has for years been known as the Spouse Abuse Center. And when I hear that, I cringe because it implies that you either have to be married, but it also implies that that's all we do is provide shelter services. Of course, shelter services are a big part of what we do. It's a place where individuals that are escaping domestic violence can come and we can provide them safety and security. We will tell clients the only time we can assure their safety is in the shelter. It's like trying to get into Fort Knox. You're not going to get in without somebody allowing you in. So we have high security system, cameras that are monitored 24/7. But then in our non-residential services, we do things like court advocacy. Not everybody wants to come to shelter. We've also seen an increase in our non-residential services during COVID-19 because people don't want to live or go to a communal area. Like, it's hard enough for staff and, you know, for us to be there knowing that we're at risk and that we take that home to our families. But we've continued to do that regardless. So during COVID-19, we have not slowed down one bit. Our services have maintained with the exception of groups. So we, you know, continue to do individual sessions and using technologies such as Skype or Teams, Zoom meetings. But other than that, it's been business as normal. I've been at OASIS for about a year and a half. I started in January of 2019. And one of the changes that I made since I've been there is that shelter is open to men. We've always provided services to men, but it looked different. So we would put a male victim in a hotel or pay to relocate them. But one of my main goals has been to be inclusive of all of our services, regardless of gender identity, gender assignment at birth, it doesn't matter. If you're a victim of domestic violence, you will receive equal services. With that being said, we had to do some construction and change some things around in the shelter to be able to do that because we still need to keep individuals safe. There's a lot of screening, making sure we don't have abusers just trying to get into shelter to get to their victims, all those kinds of things. Let's see, I feel like I kind of rambled.
Hey, that's okay. We appreciate just kind of a synopsis there, and I'm glad you touched on the men's services. That was actually one of my questions, and I didn't really explain the format or how we go about our Zoom socials. It's typically, I will ask questions. We ask everybody that's on to, if they have questions while someone's speaking, to just put that in the chat box, and I'll read those out to you as we go, or anybody that wants is welcome to speak at any time. But keep that in mind, guys. We have the chat box at the center of the bottom of your screen. We also have Evan Holcomb with us. He is our contract therapist through True North. So a lot of times we'll refer to him on some questions about mental health and things such as that. So just to give you, Andrea, kind of an idea, I think most of our advocates that are on have been on before and are familiar with that, but you probably weren't. So just bring you up to date. Oh. while I was preparing for the Zoom today, I kind of looked at your website and noticed some really staggering numbers. I was just going to read some of them. It stated that a woman is battered every 9 seconds in the United States. I'm sure some of these may be old stats too. 1 in 3 women in the U.S. have been victims of some form of domestic violence. 1 in 7 have been stalked by an intimate partner. And this is the really troublesome part for us as CASA advocates that work with youth in the court system. 90% of the children in these homes have been eyewitnesses to that violence.
Mm-hmm.
Those numbers seem really alarming. Do you feel like the numbers are increasing, or do you feel like as a society we're just doing a better job? I know years gone by, this was kept in home and people didn't
Right.
talk about this and that. So I didn't really know. Do you feel like it's increasing, or just that we're acknowledging it and offering help better than we did?
I want to speak to that, and I'm going to touch on specifically like how COVID-19 has affected domestic violence. So I already kind of mentioned, you know, people don't want to come into shelter because it's scary to be in communal living. Our numbers seem to decline during COVID-19. So we didn't have as many people coming into shelter. We still receive crisis calls, but things seem to, you know, settle down a lot. That doesn't mean that the domestic violence stopped. If anything, we expect that it has increased and become even more dangerous for victims. Sorry if my cat, she's trying to climb up on the computer. So I'm trying to block her. So if you see me moving, I'm not dancing. But we expect that numbers go up for a couple different reasons. We see a decline in those crisis calls because now victims are stuck at home with their abusers without opportunities to reach out for help. So whereas before, you know, maybe they could pick up the phone and call and talk to somebody when they left for work or their abuser left for work, when COVID-19 happened, the whole world stopped. And so you have victims stuck at home with their batterers or their perpetrators without an outlet. We also expect that violence increased during those times because with domestic violence, it's power and control. It's a cycle of violence based on power and control. And so when you have batterers that have maybe experienced job loss or loss in resources, that takes away power and control, that increases stress and anxiety for not only the victims, but also the perpetrator. And then you're gonna see an increase in substance use. So maybe more drinking, more drugging, to self-medicate to deal with that increased stress. So we actually expect that situations increase violently for victims of domestic violence. One statistic I'd like to share is last year in the state of Kentucky, we had 29 murders of domestic violence just in the state. 2 of those were in Henderson County. Just between the middle of March to the middle of May, we had 9 murders in the state of Kentucky. So you think just that small amount of time where we had 29 for the whole year last year, just within those 2 months, we had 9 murders that were directly related to domestic violence. So when stress and those circumstances get a little rocky at home, we're gonna see an increase. One thing I would like to point out as well is that children, as you mentioned, they're a witness to this. And think about those stressors for kids, because now for a lot of kids, you guys will know, the only healthy meal or full meal that they might get is when they go to school. And so now they don't have that outlet or that break, and they're home and they're anxious and they're running around and they're bored and they're needy. Kids eat a lot when they're bored, you know, all of those different factors. But then you're dealing with parents or family members that are battling with their own issues and mental health and substance and stress. So it becomes even more volatile for kids. And statistically, children that witness domestic violence in the home are also victims of abuse and neglect from their parental figures or guardians. So I would guess that, you know, it's probably high. And then most people don't report. A lot of people don't. Statistically, a female victim will experience abuse and leave 9 times before she'll leave for good. And so that's 9 times that dependent children are also still stuck at home dealing with this. So we have a huge youth advocacy program that we've been developing over the past year. We're actually getting ready to remodel our daycare, and we're getting ready to create a teen room just so that we can make sure that we're meeting the needs of kids. And we have 2 youth advocates that are new to our staff, where that's all they do is deal with the kids. That's their primary focus. So.
Great, great. I know, and Evan, I'm going to jump to you real quick on this, because I know a lot of times we talk about it, it's usually the victim of the domestic violence, and I know OASIS does an exceptional job on providing counseling for those victims, but the youth themselves, maybe, Evan, can you give us any indication on some of the signs to look for as youth that have been in those situations?
Sure, and I've worked with youth that were in the shelter at OASIS here in Owensboro, and it's a really good facility. They were very helpful in terms of providing times and abilities to reach these youth. But rapid changes in mood can be a normal sign of adolescence, but depending on the severity of it, that's what we're going to look for. Changes in interpersonal relationships, changes in functioning at school and at home. So, from being generally well kept to being unkempt and uncleanly, being late when we're usually on time, openly defiant when we're generally not. Just these rapid changes in behaviors are indication of trauma in general. And then we have also expressed fear or kind of not wanting to talk to certain people. And express fear about certain people, which might not be as overt, saying like, I'm fearful that this person is going to do something. I'm fearful mom, I'm fearful of dad, but it might be simply just not wanting to talk to them. So just kind of asking what their supports are, if they'd be willing to talk to dad, if they'd be willing to talk to mom, which one would it be? So the more information we can collect in interactions, the better off we're going to be.
Gotcha. And that's for the children. What about for adults? Are there signs that if we're working with the youth in the court system and we feel like there's been domestic violence in the home, what are some of the signs? And this can go to Evan or Andrea. You're both very knowledgeable in the field of the adults, whether it's a male or female, that we should be looking for.
Andrea, you might speak more to this, but just kind of difference in appearance, hiding certain parts of the body, and that can also be for any types of behavior, including self-harm, but also domestic violence, bruises, kind of like jerkiness, sudden movements that you're scared that you typically wouldn't be, loud noises or very soft ones that cause that, random surprises that get a really drastic response that you necessarily wouldn't have, or they didn't have in the past. What about you, Andrea?
I would say you can have a victim that is maybe expressing that they have to get permission to do certain things, permission to spend money or to go somewhere, anxiety about not doing things that their batterer would expect them to do, such as, well, I have to be home by a certain time because if I don't have dinner ready, he's going to get upset. Or, and maybe it's not even that expressed that clearly, but, just kind of walking on eggshells, suddenly ending or interrupting phone calls is a big one. So if you're talking to them and then they just, maybe you hear his voice or could be her voice, because again, we want to be inclusive and, recognizing victims of all genders, but being very secretive about things, not wanting to open up and share. Just keeping in mind that abuse is just not always physical. It's very common, but you can have victims that experience abuse every day, and physical could be once a month, as far as physical abuse. So it could be controlling finances. Maybe that the parent or, the victim works, but never has money, because it could be that her batterer is controlling the money, doesn't allow her to go to do certain things. So it can be
Okay.
optional too. So.
I'm going to change the topic or subject just a little bit. How are you funded, and how has COVID affected your financial stability at OASIS?
Okay, we're funded through quite a few different streams. We do receive federal, state, and local funding. So our largest funder is pass-through dollars through KCADV, so our state coalition. That's a combination of federal funds, FIPSA, Family Violence Prevention. We get money from, it's called CFC TANF. So there's a combination of federal, state, and local funding sources. So we have KCADV. We're recipients of VOCA, which is federal source of funding. That money is still passed through to the state, but it is federal funding. We're funded through United Way, private donations, and then we do fundraising. COVID's affecting our financing through the fact that we can't do our fundraiser this year. Every year we do a trivia night, and that's usually in August. That's not going to happen. But have no fear. I'll find some creative way to do some kind of online or, virtual fundraiser. But we've seen a lot of support from the community, and so that's been really, really helpful. So I don't feel that we're not financially stable. We're not at risk for not being able to operate. If anything, we're mandated by Kentucky revised statute that we have to operate, so we don't really have an option. So, but we push through. We haven't experienced any of our major funders, maybe a little slower to receive reimbursements, but all of our funds, we foot the bill on the front, and then we're able to submit for reimbursement, which is pretty common with federal dollars. So,
Let me ask you this. If you are a victim of domestic violence, how do you wind up at OASIS? Is it normally because OPD has gotten involved, or someone's turned in a CPS report, or do you find that you have more victims that just reach out and ask to come there?
It's a combination of all of those. So people are referred to us. One thing that I've realized, especially through COVID-19, is that we've had to be a little bit more open as to accepting those crisis calls instead of expecting them to be by phone. We've seen an increase in messaging through Facebook or email. And again, I think that's because people are sitting at home with their batterers, so they don't have that opportunity to have those conversations openly. So we've seen social media and electronic communication increase. There's a few different ways. If there's ever a victim of domestic violence, regardless of what they think they want or what they think they need, it's important for them to call. Especially during COVID-19, we've had people that needed to escape. And it was a matter of their safety, and they refused to go into shelter because that was scary. Again, pandemic, communal living. And so we've been able to be creative and put, families in hotels or be able to help relocate them. A couple months back, I had a lady that was escaping a horrible, horrible situation. And she had family in Denver. And she also had a dog. So not only did I take her dog to get vaccinated so the dog can go on the airplane, but I bought a kennel for the dog, and we paid for, her plane ticket and transportation and food once she got there. So one size does not fit all. Everybody's needs are going to be different, but we'll do everything we can to meet our clients where they're at, our victims. So if someone is trying to escape domestic violence, but they're not interested in shelter, I would still encourage them to call because there's other things that we can do to help them. So.
Awesome. That's great. That's a wonderful story.
I've even moved clients from like Henderson or Hancock County. We moved them to another county just so their batterer wouldn't know where they are.
Wow.
And like I have one in a hotel now where she's moved to another county because we're waiting for the police to be able to pick him up on warrants because he's tried to kill her multiple times and her and her aren't safe. So I put her in a hotel. Once the police contact me and say we have him in custody, then she can go back to her home that she owns, you know, but in the meantime, you know, we do what we can to keep them safe. So
that's awesome. A lot of times as CASA advocates, we're working with youth in the court system and their families. And if we see these victims, or we suspect now, especially after having our Zoom social today and kind of understanding a little bit more some of the signs of domestic violence, if we think that's happening and we're working with that family, how can we maybe talk to them about OASIS without coming off as being offensive? A lot of times they try to keep that in-house and they'll deny it. I mean, can you give us some tips on how to just mention your organization without saying we feel like you're being beaten?
Yeah, I would, you know, just make sure that that person knows that you're a safe person to talk to. Confidentiality is going to be a big thing. Of course, in your position, you know, I'm sure you're mandatory reporters. So, you know, there's a fine line there. But you can usually work through that. But just letting that person know that that you're there to support them and you just want to provide them resources, you know, brochures, links to the website, Facebook, just maybe asking gentle questions, you know, and maybe just instead of coming straight out and saying, hey, I think you're being abused, you know, just, you know, saying, you know, hey, these are different forms of abuse. And if you're experiencing that, I just want you to know that there's support out there and I can help connect you. Or just giving the resources, you know, giving a packet of information and, you know, throw a few different things in there, like some heart health or, you know, some different things. So the focus is not on just the domestic violence piece, you know.
And that was actually one of
services.
Sorry, Andrea, didn't mean to cut you off there. That was actually, I was going to ask if you have pamphlets that we could get to maybe just slip a pamphlet to someone without having to have a big open conversation in a hallway of the court judicial system center.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we'll look. I'll see about getting some of those from you and providing them to our advocates if they feel like they need them.
Absolutely.
We have a question. The police started using a survey when at home asking about personal safety. I think this, I may be wrong, but I think that was something that actually happened after an actual murder here, very close to where you and I both, Andrea and I live on the same street. That's why I say that.
I moved now.
Did you really? Oh,
yeah.
Well, we'll talk later about that. I didn't know. Okay. Yeah. Can you see an increase in the police referrals to the shelter since they started doing that survey when you're in the home?
So I believe, Rosemary, you're asking about the lethality assessment, and that's something that has been in the works for about 5 years. As far as creating this lethality assessment, many years of work between OASIS, the county attorney, and law enforcement. We launched this lethality assessment in January 1st, actually. And so there's just a series of questions that ask about weapons, threats. The biggest benefit that I see to this is that a lot of times people don't reach out for help. So I think it's made us aware of even more domestic violence that's happening that we wouldn't normally know about unless that victim reached out for services. We're very cautious when it comes to reaching out to somebody, especially, you know, the last thing you want to do is call a victim while she's sitting there with her batterer to offer domestic violence services, because that could cause her batterer or her abuser to take out. So that could be physically, emotionally harmful to the victim and the kids, especially if that abuser feels like he or she is going to be losing control in that situation. So we're very cautious with that. So we do get the referrals from the police department or the sheriff's department or state police. So if they respond, and it's just in Davis County right now, other jurisdictions across the state have their own form of lethality assessments, like I know Louisville does. But so just in Davis County, if police respond or law enforcement respond, they'll ask a series of questions, and that'll trigger a referral. So within 1 to 2 hours of police responding, we'll get the referral with the perpetrator's name and the victim's name and some minor details. So that information comes to us. We'll follow up 1 to 3 times with the victim by calling from a blocked number, and like not leaving a voicemail, not leaving a message. A lot of times we'll get the victim on the phone and we'll make an introduction and who we are and what we can offer. And they'll say, I don't want your help. Don't call me again. And they hang up. And that could be for a lot of different reasons. You know, we're going to call it buyer's remorse. You know, your batterers now come back and apologized and promised they'll go to counseling and it'll never happen again. And you love this person, so you believe them. Keep in mind that, you know, victims always generally love their abuser. They just don't like the abuse. It's the same with kids. Kids love their parents or their guardians, but they don't like the abuse. And so that's not a situation where that victim is going to stop loving or caring for that person. So we'll try to make contacts, but you know, it's really up to them whether or not they're ready to accept the help or not. They'll never be turned away, whether it's been 3 times that they've called us and decided they didn't want it, or 30 times. Every single time they call, we will be there. So as many times as it takes the victim to decide that he or she is done. So
I think, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, Andrea, when you first were speaking about I personally feel like a lot of it has to do with their safety and their fear of their safety. If they, even if they were to make it all the way to your shelter, they're scared that their abuser or their batterer is going to come to the shelter if they know where it's at. And so can you tell us a little bit more about just how you ensure the safety once they do get to the shelter?
We show them, you know, the safety and the security of the shelter, but sometimes it's not so much their own personal safety. We'll see times where, because they can't bring their animal, they can't bring their dog, and so maybe their abuser has threatened to kill their cat or their dog or their pet, who they also love. That's also a common reason why victims will not leave their abuser, because they may not be able to take their pet with them. Or it could be, you know, that I'm going to destroy all of the family pictures, or, you know, they'll take the birth certificates and social security cards, or, you know, you'll be gone, and when your check comes in the mail, I'll have it and you won't, you know, be able to get it, you know. So there's a lot of different ways that batterers and abusers will manipulate clients. You know, even just saying, like, if you leave, then I'm going to tell your employer that you did this, or I'm going to call social services. We see that all the time, where abusers will use social services or custody to manipulate their victims. It is so common. And we even see it where victims of domestic violence will lose their kids because they're in a domestic violence situation. So, I mean, we've seen it where, you know, they get charged with dependency and neglect because they did not leave.
And I think as someone, a former social service worker in the building where those calls come in, it's been, I personally, and I'm sure Ashley, she's been there too, can attest, I feel like sometimes when you're making that, it's hard for folks that haven't been in the middle of that to understand when you get those CPS calls. A lot of times it's just a bitter breakup and they're just trying to get each other in trouble. And so it's very difficult for the workers to decipher. So a lot of times they're not substantiated, and we can't understand why are they not taking this serious, but if you factor in the number of calls that come in that aren't necessarily legitimate, but just threats by either a batterer or just a divorce situation. So I'm glad you said that, because that's definitely an issue with that social service workers have to deal with on a regular basis. So yeah. Does anybody have any questions before I keep going? I always feel like I dominate, but
I will share a little something extra that we're doing, a little something different. So only a few of you know me, but I'm originally from Denver, and my background is as a criminologist. So I'm not a social worker in the sense of, a lot of the work that we do. I've done social work. I've, worked in child welfare and foster care and the Denver Police Department. But my background is as a criminologist. And in Denver, what I did was actually complete risk assessments on domestic violence offenders. And that's something that we're starting to do here in Davis County. When an abuser, either through EPO court or criminal court, we will do this risk assessment that gives the probability of that batterer or offender reoffending, be it on that same victim or someone else. And it has about a 77% accuracy rate. So that is another thing that we are using. It's called ODARA, ODARA. And it is a validated risk assessment tool. So
do you, I guess I'm being judgmental in my question, but once you have an abuser or a batterer and you've done that, are they really high statistics that they're going to repeat? I would assume they would, but
it depends, because you can have somebody where you think, oh, this person is going to score high, and they don't. It's very black and white. There is no emotion behind it. It is, have you been convicted of a violent offense? Have you been convicted of domestic violence? Have you failed conditions on bond or probation or parole previously? Have you assaulted a victim while she was pregnant? Does the victim have children by another person besides her abuser? So there's 13 questions and they all factor in. There's no way to really manipulate it. It's just very straightforward. But what I like about it is that, because unfortunately some people, are not honest and manipulate. And sometimes our victims do too, just because that's how they've learned to survive. And then you couple in, mental health and substance use. So the good thing about this risk assessment is that it really provides an accurate, just probability. It's not, if he scores or she scores high, this person is going to reoffend. It's a probability that they will. So we just provide that to the court to help them in making decisions as to whether or not there needs to be an EPO, whether or not, children are more at risk. And it's very new. ODARA's kind of slowed it down from us being able to fully run with it. But our court system seems very open, and the Claude does too. So we're excited to see where this goes. And it's used across, the country, around the world. And it's even been in use for some years in Louisville. So
is that assessment available to other, can we see the assessment?
Yes, you have to be certified to facilitate it. So there's training that you have to go through, but I can send you some information. Anybody can use it if you're trained. So it's very common to be used by law enforcement or social workers, advocates. So it's something that you guys may find to be useful. It doesn't cost anything. So
awesome. Evan says he's already found
that you
it.
have to go through though. Huh?
Evan's already found it online, he said, and he's asking what's the best way to become certified if you want it.
Set up an account and just do the online. It's through Waypoint out of Canada. So, you can go through there, and if you need some assistance in how to maneuver through that process, I'm more than willing to help with that. So,
Gotcha. What are
It's
the
pretty, I mean, expect it to take you some hours. I mean, it's a lot of studying, and
Gotcha.
I would say 6 to 8 hours. But it's very interactive, and the online system is fairly easy. So,
Gotcha. Dina, go ahead.
Oh. You have addressed domestic violence, and most of us understand to a great extent what it is, but there's a lot of abuse, which is also domestic violence at emotional and mental level. What kind of support could a victim get while still being in the company of the abuser?
our non-residential services, groups, I mean, they can come and get individual sessions, individual counseling. I did hire, at the end of last year, we have a therapist that's also a CADC. So we provide those therapeutic services, both in shelter and to non-residential services, non-residential clients. So if someone just needs to talk, we'll safety plan with them. Talk about, when you're ready to leave. These are the things that, you can do. We'll talk to them about making sure that all of their vital documents, birth certificates, driver's license, social security cards, having a bag packed, maybe having items kept off site so that the batterer can't find them and prevent the victim from being able to use those. So
That was actually one of our questions, was if you provide a checklist for victims so that to have that ready for when they do flee.
mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. There was another question. Oh, what percentage of abusers are male versus female? Do you have stats on that?
I don't have a number. I think it's going to depend. I can tell you that more abusers are male than are female. But in the past year, we've had two male victims of domestic violence that came into shelter, and they needed to be there. One of them was the first man that stayed in shelter. The police called, and they were afraid for his life, and they couldn't find him. They were searching. They had warrants for his arrest. But they were like, we know you don't take men, but do you have any resources? We'll help get him somewhere else. We just need to know what to do. And I had already started talking to my staff. And so literally my crisis office manager called and said, we have a man that needs to come into shelter. We came up with a plan. We brought him into shelter. We went to court with him the next morning to get the protection order. His batterer got arrested, and then we were able to help him relocate to St. Louis with his family. But his life was in danger. He needed to be there. And so a lot of men aren't going to come into shelter. It's common for us to get calls, but we were talking, 400, 500 women that would be in, that call, let's say in a month's time, you maybe have 20 to 30 of those are going to be men. And we've had situations where men and their dependent children have called to seek services. And so, it can be any combination of what that situation would look like. So with that man and his 4 children, we were able to help relocate him. It's hard for anybody to come into shelter, but for men, I think it's going to be a little bit harder. There's this expectation of being macho and being strong, and, a sign of weakness if your woman or your partner is hitting on you. There's a lot of feelings and emotions and societal views that interfere with men being able to reach out to services, but we've seen an increase, so.
And Maku, I see your question, but I'm going to ask one beforehand that might actually answer that. If not, we'll go to yours next. But I've read that you guys utilize the empowerment model once they actually enter the shelter, that it's a 3-phase system, which is based on orientation, structure, and services. Can you explain those phases to us and what, once someone actually arrives at the shelter and is staying at the shelter, what can they do?
So basically the first phase is orientation. And so someone would come into shelter. We're going to just help them get acclimated. We're going to make sure that they have their basic needs met. One thing to remember is that most victims come to shelter with nothing. So they have the clothes on their back, and that's it. They don't always have time to, pack a suitcase or grab their medications or, anything like that. It's a fleeing situation. So if someone comes into shelter in that situation, we're going to get them some clothes. We're going to make sure that they eat, and that they can just go to bed and just relax and debrief with someone. So during that orientation phase is really just getting them acclimated to what shelter looks like, what services are available, getting them to court for a protection order. But it really is just reaffirming for them that they're in a safe place. For those that stay, because they don't always, but for those that stay, then they'll move into another phase where they start working and participating in groups, just learning about the cycle of violence. That can look like, groups on self-esteem, substance use, whatever their individual needs are. But they'll learn more about the abuse cycles. And then in between the second and third phase, then we start helping them with getting housing, securing employment, getting benefits if they need benefits. So if they need to get a birth certificate or a driver's license, we'll help them go and get those things, help them apply for jobs, get medical care, just whatever they need to be self-sufficient. And then they can stay as long as they need to. I believe a few years back, it might have been that there was just kind of this expectation that you could stay for up to 3 months. But that's not our practice now. We can't fit victims into a box and say that you have to operate within this square of what we say you have to operate in. If a client needs to be there a week, we're going to help them for that week. If they need to be there for 9 months, we're going to help them for that 9 months. We have to meet them where they're at. And so if you have a client that has substance use issues, you can't expect them to get clean in a week and, be ready to go and get a job in an apartment. And so we're going to meet the clients where they're at and just take care of their needs as, we let them drive. We let them set their own course, and we assist them at their pace.
That's awesome. We've all seen how the victims have been, a lot of times they come in to your shelter, they've been berated and belittled and what we refer to as beaten down, and told repeatedly possibly that they can't maintain on their own, they can't raise children on their own, they can't maintain a household on their own. I know you guys offer, as part of that phase system, parenting classes, life skills, and even financial literacy, which is, I wanted to make sure you could let everyone know about that, because a lot of times they do come in so low, it's such a low point in their lives that they don't feel they can. So
yeah. Oh, we have like the level of classes and supports that we have, like staff is amazing. First off, they all have their expertise in their areas that they're really strong at. But like with the financial literacy, helping them get their credit cleaned up. Because a lot of times, one of the things you'll see in financial abuse is that batterers will do things to intentionally harm a person's credit, so that they can't go and get their own place, or they can't go get a loan. So we'll help them get their credit cleaned. We'll help them save. We'll match their dollars so that they can buy a car. So we'll actually help them purchase a car. We'll pay up to 2 years of rent and utilities and deposits so that they can not have to go back to their abuser. And that they can be self-sufficient. Up until a couple years ago, literally it ended last year, but we were able to help people pay for school. But that federal program was ended, and so we don't still have that, but we'll connect them to whatever resources they need.
I was going to say, I think Dina has some options in that area that would certainly apply. If you want to jump in, Dina, and tell about the program.
Yeah. Actually, I was going to ask that question. Glad you mentioned that you help them retrain for a job that they may have never done. So we have short-term certificates, one can say credentials, and there are 5 sectors that state supports because of need for employment in those sectors. So one is transportation, and of course, more male might be attracted to repairing a car than a female. But for gender equity, we provide support to females who want to go into a certificate in car repair or something. So transportation is one sector, but then health sector and manufacturing and CIT, which would be the computer-based training and so on. So if someone goes into a certificate or a higher credential, including an associate degree in that area, it's all paid by the state. No tuition is charged to the student. So if you have your clients that may have an interest in retraining or getting a short-term certificate so that they can be self-sufficient, that option is certainly available. So I hope we can reconnect in this aspect and provide you information that you can share with your clients. And they may have a job which they're currently happy in, but as more unemployment is kicking in the state, they may want to change a career choice here and go into one of the high demand, high wage areas.
I'd be extremely interested.
So yes, so we'll share that information with you. Obviously, these options are available to everyone, but and when I say everyone, the requirement that Kentucky has is you have to be a Kentucky resident. That means your street address should be in Kentucky. We wouldn't take care of someone who is from across the bridge. But that was my question. Would you do it for anyone? Because you mentioned some men who called you and then they were relocated in St. Louis. So do you take care of just the Kentucky or Owensboro, Davis County area, or could it all come to you from Indiana and you serve them as well?
We just serve the Green River area district, but we have partnerships. So we've had victims come from Indiana. We're not as open to that during COVID-19, but we would help that person connect to other resources. Indiana does have their own domestic violence services and shelters. I can't speak to the nature of what or how they provide, but if someone calls, we're going to help them regardless. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll bring them into shelter, but you know, we can definitely help. It's just case by case basis, so it would depend on the circumstances. So it's never a hard no or an automatic yes.
And I'll go ahead and add that some of our credential, I should say most of them, more so under COVID, can be obtained remotely. So if someone has transportation issue and they're not able to get to the college, we have online trainings for them to do. And I hope your shelter has some kind of technology support for folks who might want to take the courses remotely.
Yes. Actually, we have a like a business center for them where there's access to a phone, printer, scanner, copier, and then they have computers. We're in the process of actually trying to get laptops and tablets for clients to be able to check out. We have tablets and laptops for the kids in daycare, but daycare is closed right now. But we've allowed clients to be able to check those out and use those. Just because we've had to do quarantine within shelter and sheltering at, you know, place. So we've had to get pretty creative, but you know, it's so funny because when I first started at OASIS, like one of the first big projects I did was like overhaul the whole IT system. And it created a whole lot of anxiety for my staff. They just, you know, were kind of like, you know, changing things too fast and, you know, we can't handle this, and, you know, even some complaints. But when COVID-19 happened and we had to, you know, have people working remotely, like staff were so grateful because that meant they could be at home and they could be at, you know, be safe and still work and provide services. So, you know, they've gotten used to it. Like they're all little IT gurus now, but a year ago, oh man, they were mad at me. They were mad.
Real quick, I'm going to try to, I know the staff of CASA has another Zoom happening right at 12, so I'm getting close to wrapping up, but I did want to touch on real quick. I know you guys have a new project called Dating Matters. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so Dating Matters is a CDC validated curriculum that's just focuses on teen and dating violence. And so we've been licensed by the CDC to be able to facilitate this training. Our goal, it was actually supposed to start this year, the end, the second quarter, second semester in Davis County and Owensboro. We were hoping to be able to launch it, but that didn't happen. We all know why. But we are hoping to be able to still do that. We had also, there was talk of us doing it Girls Inc. and Boys and Girls Club and Mentor Kids. But it's a curriculum that's basically geared towards middle school. You would be surprised how many middle school children, and I'm just going to start there, are in dating violence situations. And it's a hard idea to wrap your head around, but one example is a little girl who, she has this boyfriend. They might not even be sexually intimate, but they're dating, or at least what they think is dating. But he controls what she wears, or he tells her, you have to wear this tomorrow, or, just power and control that starts early. This curriculum, again, is designed for middle school because it's expected, once these kids go on to high school, the interventions aren't as successful. So 6th through 8th grade, it's really powerful. I can send you guys some information about that too. So we're still hoping to figure out how to facilitate that regardless of what it looks like in the schools in the fall.
I think that's a wonderful program. I'm glad to see that coming around. You do have, just so everyone knows, there is a 24-hour hotline, correct?
Yeah, it's just our main number. So, like if you're trying to call me, you call the same number, but it is 24/7. There's no such thing as holidays in our world. We have holidays, but we're still there. So, yeah.
All right.
They're trained.
Rosemary put on here, as tragic as this all is, OASIS is a wonderful asset to our community. Thank you for all that you do. And
thank you.
Unless someone has another question that I haven't asked, if you do, now's the time. If not, we can't thank you enough for being with us, Andrea. And I think all of us have heard some things just during this hour that, even though I thought I was well aware of OASIS, I heard some new things that I didn't know OASIS did or was offering. So thank you so much for enlightening us all and being part of our Zoom today. And we look forward to working with you. I'll get with you about getting those pamphlets and I'll get them distributed. All right.
Thank you so much for taking an interest in, wanting to learn about us. And please do not hesitate to reach out if you need more information, have questions, or feel like you have somebody specifically that you feel needs our services and you want to reach out. So I don't mind to take those calls as well. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. We appreciate your time and
thank you.
Appreciate everybody for being on. Thank you, Evan, for your
I'm going to get to my Mai Tai and get back to the beach. So
lucky girl. Bye.
Bye, guys.